Welcome to another episode of the Glick Show. Recording this week from Chicago. I'm just finishing out a week or so in the United States that's been really eventful. And I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the things that happened while I was here in a second. But one of the I guess what I want to talk about in this opening is anti-Semitism in America, because I've been now. This is the fourth city that I've been in a little bit over a week, and I've seen some pretty incredible things happening here over the past couple of days that really have made me alarmed. The first thing that I saw that really alarmed me was the opening that comedian Dave Chappelle had on the latest episode of Saturday Night Live. Now, I'm not a big Saturday Night Live fan. I haven't really watched it since the days of Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo. But be that as it may, many people watch Saturday Night Live, and many people like Dave Chappelle. And Dave Chappelle hates Jews, and that's just very clear. I mean, he is absolutely an anti-Semite. He's made several statements that have been hurtful and hostile towards Jewish people in the past. And it was pretty stunning that NBC permitted him to give an opening monologue at Saturday Night Live that was entirely anti-Semitic. And so you can look at it online and watch it. I see no reason to rehash everything that he said, but just to summarize. So, Kanye West, the rapper, got into trouble because he made just a slew, one after the other, of anti-Semitic statements a couple of weeks ago, and Adidas dumped him, and some other, I think, advertisers dumped him and didn't want him anymore, and he lost a lot of money as a result, because he had talked about Jewish control of Hollywood and Jewish control of the media, and he said he was going to go DEFCON 3 because he doesn't know how to talk or whatever, and he meant to say DEFCON, but who cares, against Jewish people. And so that was what Kanye has been doing recently, and I must say that I don't know any of his raps, and I don't really care about them, and I wouldn't care that he's an anti-Semite, except that he's so influential because so many people think that he's some great artist, second to, Robert Frost or something. Anyway, so Dave Chappelle gets up on Saturday Night Live, and he used the trouble that Kanye West has gotten in for his slew of anti-Semitic epithets against American Jews, against Jewish people.
The Brooklyn show business rules. This is a rule. The rules of perception. If they're black, then it's a gang. If they're Italian, it's a mob. But if they're Jewish, it's a coincidence, and you should never speak about it. I know the Jewish people have been through terrible things all over the world, but you can't blame that on black Americans. You just can't. I could see if you had some kind of issue, you know what I mean? You might go out to Hollywood and you might start connecting some kind of lines, and you could maybe adopt the delusion that the Jews run show business. It's not a crazy thing to think, but it's a crazy thing to say out loud in a climate like this.
And so Dave Chappelle, in his inevitable fashion, was a wise old black guy who's not old, but whatever. A wise black guy is going to tell the dumb black guy how to operate in a world that's controlled by Jews. A Hollywood that's controlled by Jews, and where there are certain things that you're just not allowed to say, like, for instance, the Jews. And you're not allowed to mention Jewish power, and you're not allowed to mention that the Jews control Hollywood. And if you don't do that, you stupid black person. He's saying to Kanye West, you don't get it. And then Jews are no good because they dare to blame anti-Semitism on black people, while this black comedian, as a black comedian, is attacking Jewish people. So that was it really makes your blood run cold when you see something like that, because it's not just that there's this very popular, wise, smarty pants comedian attacking Jews. It's also that he was given the biggest pulpit that a comic in the United States can have, which is you're hosting Saturday Night Live and you're doing the opening monologue of Saturday Night Live. So NBC, the network, stands behind this, and I'm not surprised by that either, because over the past couple of years, NBC has produced several shows that have been deeply, deeply hostile to Jewish people, and that have trucked in anti-Semitic stereotypes and all the rest. And I've written about them in the past. So that was the first thing that sort of terrified me. The second thing that was really maybe the one thing that terrified me, because when you see that NBC is giving the bully pulpit to Dave Chappelle, and Dave Chappelle devotes his entire monologue, as he went back to it at the end. There was a two-part thing that I watched on Twitter, and the first part, which was 8 minutes long, I think, was entirely anti-Semitic and all about mainstreaming anti-Semitism, making it totally acceptable, normalizing Jew hatred in the most insidious way that I've ever seen, certainly that I've ever seen on American television. So that was the first thing. The second thing was that I had a surreal experience. It was surreal for me. It wasn't surreal. It wasn't Salvador Dali, people coming, with three eyes down or out of a painting or out of the paint on the wall or something. It was that I had an extraordinary experience, which was that I went to the Zionist Organization of America's annual gala. I had the distinct privilege of being invited and by Moritz Klein, my old friend, my good friend, the president of ZOA, and they really they gave me a lot of respect. It was really nice. I felt like I was among my people, which I guess that is what the ZOA is. You guys are my people anyway. So I went to the ZOA annual gala, and they sat me at the fancy table in the middle. And I was sitting next to Matt Schlapp, the head of CPAC, and across from Mort. And then there was an empty chair next to Mort with no name tag on it. And the guy from ZOA who sat me down there, he said, "Oh, you see that the mystery guest is Donald Trump." And I said, "Holy moly!" I didn't say to him, "Oh yeah, obviously, I mean Trump. He's always sitting with me at dinner. I know him very well, but obviously that's a joke." And Trump came in, and there he was across the table from me, and that was really, really cool. And so I got to meet President Trump. Anyway, so obviously you get a picture with President Trump, you put it up on Twitter. So that's what I did. And this gets to the anti-Semitic part of the story. So I put it up, and I thanked President Trump for all the wonderful things that he did for Americans, for American Jews, and for Israel as during his term in office. He's truly, without doubt, the best friend Israel has ever had. And I would say American Jewry as well, with the executive orders that he put out to prosecute anti-Semites on campus in particular was an extremely important step in the war against anti-Semitism in America. So I thanked him for everything that he did. And I posted it. And then I got back to my hotel. I went to sleep. I flew to Chicago, and I looked at the feed when I sat down here, and it had over 10,000 likes, and it had thousands of retweets. And so I was reading the comments, and I was reading the retweets, and the comments and the retweets, the quoted retweets, were really interesting because the vast majority of them were really, really hateful. And some of them, a lot of them were filled with invective from American Jewish progressives who hate Trump and hate me because I like Trump, and they hate Israel because they're progressives. So that was one thing, and that was bad. That was bad. And then the other two kinds of hatred came from non-Jewish progressive anti-Semites and from neo-Nazi type anti-Semites. So I got the Jewish progressives who hate me, who hate Trump, who hate the ZOA, many of whom hate Israel, and so they were at it. Let's put them to a side for a second. Although I guess under normal conditions I would be focusing on them. But what was notable to me was that there was such an overlap, different language, generally speaking, but the convergence of the neo-Nazi anti-Semites who were attacking Trump. He was controlled by the Jews because he's not a real MAGA guy; he's a MEGA guy, make Israel great again, and the Jews are our misfortune. The Jews control the president, the former president, and we hate both. We hate Trump because he's really a Jew. So that was from the neo Nazis, and then from the progressive anti-Semites, they said the same thing, that the Jews control Trump, that Trump worked for the Jews, that Trump is an anti-Semite because he's against Jewish progressives, and Carolyn is an anti-Semite because the Palestinians are the real Semites, or I don't know, the Black Israelites are the real Semites, but that Jews are not Semites, and that I'm an anti-Semite. I, Carolyn Glick, I'm an anti-Semite because I'm anti-Palestinian, and Trump is an anti-Semite because he's against Jewish progressives, and Israel is an apartheid state, and he's a Nazi. So I'm a white supremacist, and he's a white supremacist. So those were the comments, and there was a real convergence because in both cases Trump was controlled by Jews. In both cases, the Jews control everything. And in both cases, the Jews have no right to power, and they certainly have no right to a state. So the invective, I mean, everybody knows that Twitter is a sewer and that you can find every kind of hate on Twitter. And people only have 250 or 240 characters with which to express themselves. And therefore, the invective, the hatred, the incredible hatred, it comes out hard and fast and furious, and that's what I got. And I couldn't care less about the hate that people spew on me on Twitter. I take that for granted as just the price of doing business on that platform. And I also learn a lot from the hatred. I do. I mean, I don't read all of the comments, but I read some of them, especially when it's a viral tweet that gets that kind of a play. And what can I tell you guys? I'm leaving for Israel. I'm going home on Wednesday, so in 2 days, um, I'm just sort of alarmed. I'm alarmed by the openness, the venom in the discourse, whether it's Dave Chappelle on NBC News or neo-Nazi white supremacists, progressive anti-Semites. And Jewish, frankly, haters of Israel. Progressives want their progressive identity to mean Jewish identity, and anybody who comes along and says that Judaism actually isn't woke is their enemy. So and that's also a form of anti-Semitism, telling us what Judaism has to be, what it is, and the fact that it has nothing to do with what Judaism actually is our problem, not theirs. So I think I think the situation here is alarming, and I think that to handle it, it's really necessary to not pull any punches, towards progressive anti-Semites, not pull any punches towards neo-Nazi anti-Semites. Of course, nobody does pull punches with regard to them, and to really be willing to stand with people who stand with us, stand with evangelicals, stand with President Trump, stand with Republicans, stand with Democrats who support Israel. Always stand with your friends, and always make distinctions between who your friends and your enemies are. I mean, that's the first thing that you have to do, but you also have to be alarmed. NBC, I don't know. Should you boycott them? Probably. I mean, should you not watch them? Probably. Maybe go do the left's tactics and boycott their advertisers. I don't know exactly, but I mean, some actions should be taken. Maybe somebody should sue them for libel. Maybe somebody should sue Dave Chappelle. I don't know what the laws are, but I mean, you have to take real action against these people. And he was making fun of the Jews and saying, oh, it's terrible that the Jews got Adidas to drop Kanye West, aka, what's the word, seething anti-Semite, murderously anti-Semitic, whatever, inciter of anti-Semitism. But here's Dave Chappelle, who's so cool. He's so cool. You want to sit down and have a beer with him, and he's legitimizing and mainstreaming anti-Semitism on NBC, on Saturday Night Live. And these things really, they need to be addressed, and people should have to pay a price for doing these kinds of things. I'm really glad. Maybe I'm going to go out and buy Adidas shoes for my kids next time they ruin their sneakers. I don't know, but people who stand against anti-Semitism should be rewarded. And so those are my thoughts, the opening of this show. And now I want to turn to my guest, Lee Smith, and talk to him about the newest onslaught of the Biden administration against Israel, and whether the elections here in the United States are going to have any impact on the Biden administration's policy towards Israel. Lee is the author of two very important bestsellers, The Plot Against the President and The Permanent Coup. He's also Lee and I got to know each other, I think, back in 2006 or so, when he wrote his first book, The Stronger Horse, which was about American Middle East policy, which was also an excellent book. And I'm certain that it's standing the test of time, and we should look at that too. So Lee is an expert, I would say, on the contemporary U.S. political scene and on the Middle East. And so I want to bring both of those fields of expertise together to talk about the elections from last week, the midterm elections, and their impact on the Biden administration's policies in the Middle East. So first of all, thanks so much, Lee. I was been waiting for you to get on this show for a while. I'm glad that we're both here in America at the same time and you could join me.
Thank you, Caroline. Thanks for inviting me on. Great to see you. I'm really honored to be on the show and with your fantastic audience. So thanks all of you for watching too.
So Lee, let's talk a little bit about the elections. But first, the segue that I want to use here is a story that my colleague at Israel's Channel 14, Akiva Bigman, broke on Monday, which is that the FBI has informed Israel, the outgoing government, the Defense Department, the Justice Department of Israel, that it has opened a criminal probe of the death of Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was an American citizen who was embedded with Islamic Jihad terrorists in the town of Jenin during a firefight that they opened against IDF forces back, I think it was in April. And she was killed in the crossfire. And now the FBI wants to open a criminal probe of Israeli soldiers who it claims were involved with the gun battle. And this is really a shocking turn of events. It's shocking in two ways. First of all, after Abu Akleh was killed, the State Department came down on Israel and the Biden administration in general like a wall of bricks and demanded that Israel open an investigation into her death. And it was bizarre because here's this woman who works for a terrorist-aligned television station, Al Jazeera, owned by Qatar, controlled by the Qatari regime, which is a state sponsor of terrorism. She's embedded with Iranian-controlled terrorists at the time of her death, and the U.S. State Department is demanding an accounting from Israel for her death, which was shocking. And they didn't relent until Israel put out a sort of throat-clearing statement that said that it's likely that she was killed inadvertently by IDF forces during the course of the attack. And Israel thought that if they gave that pound of flesh to the State Department, that they would walk away. But here, a few months later, come the Justice Department and the FBI, and they say that they are opening up a criminal probe of IDF forces. What do you make of this story?
What we've seen repeatedly is this is how Obama and Biden go after their adversaries, right? This has happened again and again. And it's very important for people to keep in mind about Russiagate. Yes, Hillary Clinton paid for Fusion GPS to write the Steele dossier. But those intelligence services, those senior officials like Andrew McCabe, James Comey, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, John Brennan, they were not being paid by Hillary Clinton. They were working for Barack Obama, right? These were Barack Obama's spy chiefs who were up to this. We've seen We've seen since Russiagate, we've seen a number of different operations involving the FBI, from going after school parents protesting against critical race theory and gender, pushing gender ideology on their kids. We've seen the FBI using all sorts of social media platforms to spy on American citizens. Most recently, Facebook. Of course, the former general counsel for the FBI was general counsel for Twitter, a man named James Baker. Then, of course, we saw the FBI raid the home of Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. This is something that we'd never seen in the United States before. The point is this: if the FBI is being used to go after American adversaries here, or go after Obama, Biden adversaries here, it should not come as a surprise, as distressing as it is, that they would turn this around on traditional American allies, but who happen to be not friends or not allied with the Obama-Biden faction.
I guess my only quibble with what you're saying is not that this is a political use of the FBI, but more that Israel is not only a U.S. ally, but it's also an ally that's being targeted by its Arab enemies, by Iran, but also by the progressive left in the United States and in Europe for politicide under the claim that we're a criminal state. Using every classical and new blood libel in the book to castigate Israel and to deny its very right to exist. So that you're looking at it's not merely trying to get rid of a political adversary. It's also it's a belligerent act against Israel that is sort of attaching itself to a wider push by the left in the United States. And we saw, some of the progressive senators were congratulating the Justice Department for opening up a criminal probe of Israeli citizens, of Israeli soldiers, on this issue. And so it's not just let's get rid of the candidate in the other party. It's let's attach ourselves to a belligerent campaign of political warfare that acts in direct support for terrorist organizations and enemy armies engaged in war against the Jewish state. So I mean that's different. That's very different.
I think if we can tie together a few different threads here, right? We can tie together the domestic thread here I'm talking about regarding the Obama-Biden faction's opponents here at home. I think the other thread that we can tie in is how Israel is perceived by this same political grouping. Look, Israel is an American ally. It is not an ally of the Obama-Biden grouping, right? That probably holds true for all of the Democratic Party. It's certainly true with Obama-Biden. I don't know how else to describe anymore to people how the idea that Obama legalized Iran's nuclear weapons program and that Joe Biden wants to restore that deal. If people can't see fundamentally what that's about, I don't know how to explain it. I know there are both people here in the United States who imagine and write as if that's not the case, and they try to rationalize it. And I know it's true in Israel as well. It's simply the fact. And as I try to remind people all the time, if you look at the sunset clauses, they actually tell you what's happening, right? The sunset clauses are those clauses restricting Iran's activities in very important ways. But sunset meaning they're all due to expire. So at that point, right, Iran will have a fully legal nuclear weapons program. So it was never meant to prevent Iran from getting the bomb. It legalizes the bomb. You will hear people say, no. In the deal, it says that Iran will never get a bomb. There's no restrictions on it. Nothing in the agreement. The purpose is to legalize the bomb. So if this political grouping is arming with a nuclear bomb Israel's chief strategic adversary, I think it should not come as a surprise that that same political grouping in the United States, the progressive faction led by Obama, now through or with, I think it's more likely through Joe Biden, perceives Israel not as an ally, but as an adversary.
So by going after Shireen Abu Akleh, they're joining up in sort of the international political war to delegitimize Israel's very existence. Because if you're saying that soldiers engaged in lawful acts of war and of national defense against an illegal terrorist organization inadvertently kill a journalist who is friendly with those terrorists and embedded with those terrorists and known by all these terrorists as a friend of theirs and who works for a terror-aligned channel, network, Al Jazeera, and you're saying that those soldiers should be subjected to a criminal probe for their lawful acts in defense of their country, then what you're saying is that Israel is an inherently criminal enterprise and an illegitimate state, because I mean that's just the underlying message here that's unmistakable. And
That's what they're
just
saying.
past.
Yes, that's absolutely right. That's 100% what they're saying. And on the other side of it is look, you and I may have spoken about this over the last couple of days. We had a lot to talk about. That look, traditionally, American policy, we talk about that America, the United States, shares not only interests with our allies, with most of our allies, but we also share values, right? That's why we talk about Israel being the greatest, the only democracy, only real democracy in the Middle East. Because we talk about shared values, and we talk about Israel being a David against the Goliath of the Muslim majority Middle East, which, thank goodness, thanks to the Trump administration, now there are different relations, and let's hope these are growing more and more. But this is the way to understand the Obama team's relationship with Iran, right? They share colleagues, Mike Duran, Tony Bedran, most notably, they've written the definitive piece on realignment. Look, I think the realignment, I think their case is exactly right. I would only add one more thing, which I think that we've seen when I was speaking before about how Obama and Biden have sent the FBI after their opponents. Look, these are people who really operate like third world operatives. That's what you do when you send your spy services after opponents. You put them in jail, you bug them, you arrest them. That's the other side of it. It's not just that they dislike Israel or that they think Israel is illegitimate, which is, of course, what we saw Obama doing as he was leaving in December 2016, right? Is it at 2334? I think it's 2334, right? When they're, when they're pushing, pushing
2334, the UN
and of course, Joe Biden was leaning hard on the Ukrainians at that time. Before Zelensky, it was Poroshenko to vote against Israel, and that's what the Obama administration did, saying that even holy sites in Jerusalem are on occupied territory. So no, they think that Israel is illegitimate, and the partnerships that they want to grow and nurture are with outfits like the Islamic Republic of Iran, because with them they actually do, again, not just now sharing interests, but sharing the same sorts of values. And we saw Obama boasting about this, right? Remember that John Hanna article? I think it was probably 2014 in Foreign Policy, when he was talking about meeting with Gulf Arab officials. I suspect they were Emiratis, and they were saying, yes, Obama was encouraging us, was telling us, why don't we get our own Qasem Soleimani, a hard man that can get things done. So there is no doubt that Barack Obama has admired the Iranians for their ability to get things done. But yes, there are also shared values in many different ways.
Well, okay, let's just take a step back for a second and talk about the time frame that this is happening in. It's happening in a time frame. It's not quite clear when the FBI initially approached the Israeli Justice Ministry and said, "We're opening up a criminal probe of your soldiers." But we know the story broke on November 15th. Israel's elections were 2 weeks earlier that gave an absolute majority to the right wing bloc of 64 seats in the Knesset, which has 120. And we know that the story came out as well a week after the midterm elections, or 6 days after the midterm elections in the United States, where very unexpectedly, I mean, most of the assessments by commentators, by political experts on both sides of the partisan fence, said that the Republicans were expected to win control of both houses of Congress, and they were expected to win control of the House by a very wide margin. And here we are recording on the 15th of November, and there's still counts going on in several congressional districts, but most assess that the Republicans will win a 1 or 2 vote majority in the House, and they already lost any chance of getting a majority in the Senate when they lost the Nevada Senate race. So the Democrats have retained control over the Senate, and they seem to have lost control of the House. And so when we look at these results, and we look at the results of the Israeli elections, how do you think that the political outcome in both places is impacting the way that the administration is going forward in the Middle East, whether vis-a-vis Israel or vis-a-vis Iran and what have you?
Yeah, I think the previous Israeli government of Mr. Bennett and Lapid believe that the problem with Democratic Party relations in Israel wasn't about Israel; it was about Benjamin Netanyahu. So they were going out of their way to do anything that do whatever Benjamin Netanyahu would not do. And they sought to, we can say appeasement, however we want to describe it, placate, coddle, however you want to put it. And so they were, pardon me?
Capitulate.
Yeah, capitulate's a good one. Kowtow. Yeah, serve.
That's a good one. Better.
Service. Yeah, however you want to put it. And so now that it's pretty clear that Bibi is on his way back, they're already looking for different ways to tie him down, right? Because Netanyahu is not going to go like Lapid and Bennett. I mean, he made that very clear during the Obama years. It's not going to happen. So yes, I think this is an instrument that they will use to try to pressure him as much as possible. What exactly they can use it for, it's not clear to me. I'll have to think about that a little bit more and get back to you. But of course, just the fact that there is an investigation open like that, you're absolutely right. It is, and on a traditional American ally, it's pretty shocking, and that in itself is very important. By the way, just the fact that they have an investigation open, in addition to however in other ways they can instrumentalize it, just the fact they're doing it is just the fact they're doing it as part of the force.
So, but when we were going to the elections in the United States, with the assessment that they were going to lose, do you think that they would be acting differently if they had lost control of the Senate, or if the Republican assessed majority in the House was significantly larger than it apparently is going to be, if it is at all?
You mean
Or do you think that politics and their political standing has nothing to do with how they view Israel?
No, I think the elections had. What Joe Biden said after after the earlier or at the end of last week, right, when they said, well, these are you going to change course on anything? Are you going to moderate? He's like, no, full steam ahead. They were never going to change. They didn't change when inflation As inflation continued to balloon, they didn't change when gas prices continued to soar, right? I mean, that had nothing to do that when gas prices started to drop a bit. That had nothing to do with Biden administration positive policies, right? It had nothing to do. It had to do with decrease in demand, right? Not increases in supply. And Biden was furious when Saudi Arabia failed to help him obscure the result of his climate change agenda. So no, I don't think there is any change at all. I think they'd be going at the same pace no matter what. And again, the FBI, this is an executive branch agency, and the Biden administration has been using it as a Praetorian Guard. So that's another thing to recognize. If they're using the FBI, it's serious and it's personal, because that's the Praetorian Guard they send out to go after their adversaries. But no, I don't think the numbers have anything to do with it. I do think that the election that has returned Bibi to the prime minister's office, I think that's a factor, but the American elections, not at all.
It's interesting. So what I said to a couple of friends after Israel's election was that in a sort of a twist of fate that it's almost divinely inspired. I mean, for lack of a better term, but that perhaps out of the interest of protecting the Bennett-Lapid government, the Biden administration took a softer approach to Israel over the past year and a half, because they didn't want the government to fall. I mean, granted, the reason that there's no deal with Iran so far is because the Iranians refused to make one. But they didn't conclude the Iranian deal. They didn't completely capitulate to all of Iran's demands, and in part, perhaps there was a calculation that they didn't want to bring down the Israeli government or set the stage for Netanyahu's return. And yet here, and then the expectation that by the time that Netanyahu came in, a new Republican Congress was going to be elected, and therefore the Biden administration's ability to cause massive harm to Israel was going to be somewhat contained because of the Republicans in the House and the Senate. So now we don't have the Republicans in the Senate. We seem to have the Republicans in the House. The question is, given this state of affairs where you have a split Congress, or again, I mean, this is all kind of, it looks like we're going to have a split Congress. It looks like the Republicans are going to take control of the House. What can the Republicans in the House do, if anything, to protect Israel, frankly, from this
Nothing.
administration, which seems hell bent on undermining its national security and its very existence with their kowtowing to Iran?
Nothing. And the Biden administration,
nothing. You said nothing. It can't do anything.
Yeah, no, nothing. Look, the numbers were different during when they agreed to the JCPOA, right? I mean, the numbers were different. The Republicans weren't able to help at all. There were a lot of people in powerful positions, like Senator Bob Corker, who were unhelpful in those regards. And look, Israel has lots of friends, both in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, and there may even be some friends on the Democratic side as well too. Though I
have to say, a lot of Israel's good friends on the Democratic side were not reelected to Congress. One in particular, Elaine Luria, stands out, and she was wiped out as well.
Yeah. What I think is going to happen here, you mentioned that the Iranians haven't signed or haven't come to an agreement, and I don't think the Iranians are going to come to an agreement because the Iranians want some sort of guarantee, right? That if they go back into the JCPOA, there's not going to be a Republican, whether that's Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, all of these people who love Israel, who are, very pro-Israel, and they're going to want to get out of the deal. And the Iranians don't want to go through that again. But, there's no mechanism for ensuring that the next president of the United States abides by someone else's deal, especially if it's not a treaty ratified by the Senate. It'd be very hard. So what I think is going to happen over the next couple of years, I think the Biden administration is on the clock, and I think they have to rush to get the Iranians the bomb. That's what I believe is going to happen over the next couple of years. There's nothing that can be done in the House or in the Senate. And in fact, the Biden team is going to hurry up and do it uh, because they'll be worried about what will happen in 2024. Right? I mean, who knows? Donald Trump could win again, or there could be another Republican candidate who could knock out Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom or whoever else might be running.
Okay, let me just read you. I wanna bring this. I want to bring Ukraine into the mix here because you have this. Uh, I don't know whether I would call it weird. I would at least call it reckless. The American support for the Ukrainians against Russia. You could say that it's morally understandable. Uh, I think that that would be a fair thing to say. Russia invaded Ukraine and it's tearing it apart piece by piece, and that's wrong. And the way that Russia is behaving is terrible and scary and a disaster. And so you could clearly make that case very easily, but there's a recklessness afoot in the Biden administration's decision. I mean, how much money have they already given to the Ukrainian? How much money have they already invested in Ukraine's war effort? Tens and tens of billions of dollars over the past 6 or so months, or I guess it's 9 months since the invasion, and um, and so Russia has received very, very, very powerful and dangerous and destructive drones by the hundreds from Iran over the past several weeks. And you
Modeled
would
after
think that,
American drones, by the way. I should
right,
remind you.
that Obama gave them the technology, but when they shot down a U.S. drone and then Obama didn't demand it back and he let it have they had them have it, and their entire domestic drone industry is based on that American drone, and then some, I think, Israelis that Hezbollah intercepted in Lebanon. At any rate, so it's all our technologies that are being used against Ukraine through Russia. And so the thinking had been that of some people that now that Iran is actively assisting Russia, and Russia is the gravest enemy in the entire world for the U.S. progressives in particular, but not only, I mean, also for many Republicans, that this would force a reassessment on the part of the Biden administration regarding the realignment with Iran, because how can they support Iran when Iran is using its weapons and using its money and using its economy as a gateway for Russia? So that Iran is on the other side. They're on the side of America's worst enemies, and so
They
there
supported
was.
they supported Russia in Syria. I mean, I don't know who's saying that, but whoever's saying that should go back and check what happened during the Obama years in Syria, right? I mean,
But so
this
there's this weird. Let me just finish. So there's this weird inconsistency, right? Because the progressives on the one hand hate Russia more than they hate any other country, and they're willing to risk World War III with Putin threatening to use technical nuclear weapons, and Putin and his mouthpieces repeatedly saying that they view, due to the American and NATO operations on behalf of Ukraine, that they view themselves as at war with the United States. And then here is but then the United States at the same time was using the Russians as their interlocutors towards Iran in the nuclear talks in Geneva. And like you say, Iran, which they want to embrace and give nuclear weapons to, and they already gave advanced drone technologies to, is Russia's number one supplier in this war. So that Russia, if this is a proxy war that America is fighting through Ukraine against Russia, then this is a proxy war that Iran is fighting through Russia against the United States. And so, how there is no consistency here. How can they be anti-Russia and pro-Iran at the same time when these two countries are operating, like you said, in two theaters at least, in Syria and in Ukraine, against the United States and its
Well,
allies in
a
NATO?
few things here. First of all, progressives don't hate Russia. Progressives see Russia as a proxy for Donald Trump, right? Because that's the whole Russiagate story going back to 2016. So insofar as
But
there's a
that's their
real,
propaganda. They know that it's not true. I mean,
yeah, right, and they drum up all this noise, but insofar as it really has anything to do with Russia, it has nothing to do with what we consider Russia, right? It has nothing to do with Russia as a serious threat to the United States. Look, I was writing about Russia and what Russia was doing in Syria, and I think that Russia is a threat to American allies, perhaps above all in Syria, a threat to Israel. Certainly, Israel's freedom to operate in the Eastern Mediterranean in the skies.
they
And
wiped out Israel's air superiority for the first time since 1982.
right, so Russia's a very, very serious threat, and I think. But look, the United States was not contesting. The Obama administration was not contesting Russia in Syria. So that should tell us very important things about how the progressives, how Obama, and how Biden really see Russia. What's happening right now? I agree with you when you say that it's very reckless what's happening in Eastern Europe. I think, among other things, no one has ever asked, or certainly no one in a position of power, no one close to Joe Biden has said, well, what's supposed to happen here? I mean, do we want to push out Vladimir Putin? Is that the end game? Is the end game to keep Russia and Ukraine at war permanently? Is the end game to push Russia entirely out of you? I mean, how will that happen? How much will all of these things cost?
And who would
So,
replace him? Because all of the possible successors to Vladimir Putin are far more dangerous to U.S. national security than Putin himself.
I just think the idea that no one has figured, could it be done? I guess. How much would it cost? Is it worth it? And remember, this is not Syria. This is not the Middle East. This is Russia's border. So the idea of like contesting Russia for unclear reasons on Russia's border is absolutely bizarre. So, but again, what you say is that it's very unclear what's going on because they're both right, because they both will the Biden administration once if they do come to an accord with the Iranians, Russia will benefit tremendously. They'll get at least $10 billion from the deal, and they'll serve as Iran's nuclear patron, right? So the argument that I've been trying to make, is that in fact, Democrats don't really have a foreign policy right now, and this might bring us back to the beginning of our conversation when we're talking about the FBI going after IDF forces. Right. The way that the Democrats, the way that the progressives see foreign policy, they see them as proxies for their domestic opponents. And right now, the domestic opponents for the progressives are, of course, it's the right, it's Republicans, but it's also the remnants of the pro-Israel Democratic Party. So if they're going after Israel, that's a way for them to go after their opponents here at home. Right. This is one of the reasons why they hate Saudi. Because when they look at Saudi, they see Republicans. So why the war in Ukraine looks so confused, and why it's so all over the place? Why it appears that Biden has a whole bunch of different goals or no goal at all is for that. They do not have a foreign policy.
Well, I don't know. That's extraordinary. So here, I just wanted to read you this last thing. There's this article in the Times of Israel that my friend and frequent guest on my show, David Wormser, put out. The title of the article is "Zelensky aide says Ukraine's vote against Israel at UN was a grave mistake." And we were started with the whole delegitimization of Israel. So there was just a vote, a very dangerous vote, I would say, in the UN General Assembly that wants to refer Israel and Israeli civilians, I think, or Israeli soldiers to the International Court of Justice. As is its wont, it's called the Resolution Israeli Practices Settlement Activity Affecting the Rights of the Palestinian People and Other Arabs of the Occupied Territories. I wonder who the other Arabs are. I don't even know. Crazy. Anyway, so they're referring that to the ICJ to render urgently an advisory opinion on Israel's prolonged occupation, settlement, and annexation of Palestinian territory. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so it's part of the whole Israel is apartheid thing that's trying to get Israel criminalized and annihilated, at least as a political entity in the international arena. And so Ukraine, that has been demanding that Israel give it Iron Dome batteries, voted for this anti-Israel resolution. And so then there was some talk in the Ukrainians, we made a mistake, we shouldn't have done it. Because Iran is Israel's enemy and it's siding with Russia, which is Ukraine's enemy, and therefore they should be on our side. But then the one of Zelensky's aides said in an interview on Saturday that Iran might be reconsidering its aid to Moscow's war effort after having received an offer it can't resist. That was a quote from the West without elaborating further. So the concern that David had been voicing about that was that they may reach some sort of an accord that ends Iran's support for Russia or mitigates it in some way in Ukraine in exchange for even more far-reaching U.S. Concessions to Iran. And then they'll make a deal, they'll wrap in something that has to do with Ukraine into the Iran nuclear deal to tie Israel's arms behind its back, because then if ceasefire or some such between Ukraine and Russia is linked to the JCPOA, then Israel will be the odd man out, that any action that it takes against Iran's nuclear facilities will also reinstate the war in Ukraine. So that's the basic idea, that the whole thing is just sort of a diabolical way to try to turn Israel into the enemy of all nations. And I don't know, I mean, that's certainly there's reason to worry about this. And that really goes back to my initial sort of, I don't know, quibble or a qualification of what you were saying about putting the FBI probe of IDF forces into the same context as the weaponization of the FBI against the Democrats' enemies at home. Because here, what we're really talking about, I mean, Israel is not just a democratic enemy; it's a country. And it's a beleaguered country that is being subjected to total war, political, economic, and of course, terrorist and military, conventional and unconventional war by its enemies, both political and kinetic. So it seems like it's a much bigger deal.
I mean, not to be a wise guy, but the United States is a country too, and nonetheless, over 2 years of the Biden administration, 5 million people have crossed our southern border, and they've brought not only crime, they've brought drugs that have killed, at this point, hundreds of thousands of Americans with overdoses. I can't emphasize strongly enough. I'm quite certain that some of your viewers will just think that I've totally lost it. But look at the facts. The numbers are there. It's all there. These are people who have allowed an invasion at our southern border. 5 million people. And the idea that they would have any qualms about sending the FBI, who they dispatched, who they sent after a former president of the United States, the fact that these lunatics who have been going after Israel for decades now, that they would hesitate for a second to send the FBI after the IDF is, I mean, of course not. I'm surprised I hadn't thought of it. I'm surprised. I should be embarrassed I hadn't predicted it. But of course, especially with Bibi returning to the prime minister's residence, that's exactly what they would do. This is exactly how they see the world. And frankly, I don't know what Zelensky's aide was going on about, what he heard from the West, but I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. The idea that the only place that the Russians can get drones from is Iran is nonsense, right? The idea that anyone is depending on anyone aside from Hezbollah is depending entirely on or the Houthis is depending on Iran for their armament, and that makes no sense to me. No, I think that what that's referring to is the Biden administration is embarrassed, right? It's embarrassing, but they've made a big deal out of supporting Zelensky and the Ukrainians, and here the people that they want to hand a nuclear weapon to are helping target Zelensky, and they can't do anything about it. Why can't they? I mean, again, that just speaks to their confusion That just speaks to their confusion and what their priorities are. So they're embarrassed about it. So they're sending out messages about how, oh, the Iranians going to get an offer for a deal they can't refuse and it'll make them happy. And there's just so much going on there. I mean, I think there's a lot less than what it seems, a lot less than meets the eye. How's that?
So, how would you, looking at what's happening and the way that you conflate the way that the Biden administration is treating the United States and its national security, including, along its southern border, with the way that they're treating Israel? So, if you were in a room with Netanyahu and he said, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" with this incredibly hostile U.S. administration, how should Israelis be looking at this going forward as the new government comes into power?
I'm quite certain that that serious Israeli officials who are serious about the national security of their country and the safety of their family and friends, their neighborhoods, have been have been reading our press, and you don't have to go into such great detail to see what's been happening here in the United States since 2016, since 2017, and our adversaries read our press as well. And so I think that people do have a very good read on what's going on and the character of this leadership, what these people are about, to what extent they can be trusted, how dangerous they are, what kinds of threats they pose to Israel. I mean, I'm sure that all of our allies have taken this assessment since 2017, and they've looked at what this is absolute madness. That that intelligence services, people that we actually partner with, that we work with on very important issues, are now spying on the president of the United States. I mean, okay, it's something we hadn't anticipated, but now it's something we know, right? It's different for them to spy on Benjamin Netanyahu or Angela Merkel than it is for them to spy on the president of the United States. But knowing that, people will keep that in mind and act accordingly. I mean, I think that people understand how dark the picture is here.
Well, I don't think that the previous government understood it. They may have come to understand it when the administration was strong arming them into lying down and giving our territorial and economic waters to Hezbollah and natural resources. But I'm not sure. It all depends anyway. I think that your basic underlying message is take this seriously. These people are in fact out to get us. That we have to be aware. Is that a
Right.
fair
Once you put
assessment?
everything together, once we put all these strands together, it's not hard to figure out where it's going. Just have to take these strands seriously. And if you start cutting stuff out and saying, well, but we are an ally and we've been an ally for a long time and they give us Iron Dome and this and that, like, yeah, I know all of those things. I know the history of the relationship. I know those things very well. But it has to be seen in context of what's happening now. It has to be seen in context of the Iran deal. It has to be seen in context of what's happening here in America domestically. If they're treating half of the country like this, remember, Israelis should know as well as anyone, when Joe Biden starts describing anyone who didn't vote for Joe Biden as a domestic terrorist, and when they hear people in Washington talking about using counterterrorism methods, right, against white supremacist or Christian nationalist, or however else they want to describe people who didn't vote for Joe Biden. The Israelis, being longtime partners of the United States on counter-terror issues, should know how very serious that is. Right? When we say, yeah, we're using all these things that we use against people who try to kill Americans. Now we're using them against Americans. That's serious. So again, I suspect that among all of our allies, the Israelis probably have Netanyahu and his aides probably have a clearer reading on this than most of the rest, and a clearer reading on it than, unfortunately, than many Republican officials.
All right. Well, I think we're going to have to leave it at that for this week, but I'm going to have you back because this
Bring me
this
back with
is important stuff. What can we say? This is really important stuff. And
yeah.
But I would urge all of you guys to follow Lee on Twitter and on Epic Times at his podcast Over the Target
Over the target.
and
Over the target.
Over the Target. That's where he always is. He's right over it, and then
Oh,
he just shoots
I'm
and shoots and
I'm
shoots.
hovering.
And
You can find me hovering somewhere over the target. I think I'm going to
over
use
the
that.
target,
I'm
right?
out there somewhere. You'll find me over the target.
Okay, well there you go. He is always over the target, and I think you got one. You certainly shot a few today pretty accurately and precisely. So I appreciate it very much, and we'll have you back soon. So thanks so much, Lee.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Caroline, and
much.
thank your awesome audience too. God bless all of you.
They are you guys are awesome. You're awesome. You're awesome, and we'll see you again next week. So thank you very much.